In terms of the advantages and disadvantages of permaculture compared with traditional cropping, what we call traditional cropping is really a system that's developed in the presence of cheap fossil fuels, both cheap fossil fuels to operate and manage the farm system, both directly and indirectly, and also to be able to specialise in single crops and send that to centralised markets. But those centralised market distribution systems are a product of fossil fuel in themselves. Yes. So once we don't have that high energy base, food production inevitably must come back to close to where people live. And that comes back geographically in the sense of coming back from overseas countries or the other hemisphere back to a regional economy, and back clustered into the peri-urban fabric of where people live, and right back to actually in the household economy of where people provide more of their own needs, what was conventionally called subsistence agriculture. Whereas we don't see any sort of differentiation there. It's just that when it's more efficient to produce food directly in the household economy, like with fresh fruit and vegetables, traditionally people produced most of those in the household economy, while they might have bought grains and animal livestock products because that was more efficient to do at a somewhat larger scale. So permaculture is most strongly has the advantage that it is resilient to this reduction in energy. And that is what it is primarily designed around. While energy remains cheap relatively and relatively available, those advantages of permaculture have been more muted, which is the reason it is not spread as an agricultural system. So that is the primary advantages. The other advantages of permaculture is that it can take advantage of the very site and situation specific nature of any particular system. So whether it be rocky hillsides or different small microclimates or the unique growing environments that are created in urban and settled spaces. Whereas conventional agriculture tends to try and wipe all of these differences out. And in the process, what has happened is a large amount of what has been called marginal land has been abandoned to concentrate conventional agriculture on the best large areas of flat, good agricultural soil. Whereas permaculture can make much more use of all of these differences and small marginal spaces. And of course, a lot of the world is composed of those small marginal spaces, and they exist in a interlocking framework with where people actually live. Mm. So I think those are the most important things, rather than the ability to produce more of a given crop. Yeah. For example, in the household economy, you can get a lot of secondary yields from things that grow more or less by themselves or are even weeds. And you can grow a lot of things which are marginal to your climate, but because it adds diversity to the household diet, they become of value. Whereas in the central market system, anything but the crop which is being focused on is not viable to add to the production system. They become detractors from the production system, like weeds or competing plants or competing animals. So in that sense, a permaculture system's total productivity is actually higher, even though the yields from the main traditional crops within that system may be no higher or even lower than conventional agriculture. So it's this multiplicity of yields and multiplicity of functions, ecological service functions, functions that provide things other than food in the process. For example, all traditional intensive horticulture in the past relied on people having some forest nearby to provide wooden stakes and different construction materials, and often sort of compost. Well, permaculture designs those things into a system, so you have the construction materials as well as the that is needed to aid the agricultural system. So that means there's less dependence on inputs from outside, which is a major focus for permaculture, because we see those inputs will be more expensive or unavailable in the future. And of course, the most important linkage to this human settlement food production is actually in the fertility cycle, and the recycling of human waste back to land is much easier to design and organise if there's a close coupling between agriculture and settlement. If these are very separate, then it is extremely complex, very difficult, and there's all sorts of reasons why we see, even if we are short of phosphorus and nitrogen, the problems of getting the human waste cycle back to agriculture is quite difficult with large centralised systems. And this, in the longer term, is the ultimate limit to the sustainability of conventional agriculture.